Hey Blenders, it's Sean, and I am here to introduce a bonus episode of the show, an interview that we are bringing you that didn't fit into the main show because we have a lot of stuff that's actually coming this week, which I'll tease in a second. This is an interview with David Bruckner, who has a new film coming out starring Rebecca Hall called The Night House. It is a traditional sort of haunted house ghost story with a lot of surprising twists, and I know that you're going to enjoy this interview before you head in to go see the movie, because I definitely think you have to check it out. Thank you for watching us here on YouTube. If you are checking out the video aspect of the show, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on your notifications. We want to make sure that you keep up to date with all of our fun ReelBlend content. And then in addition to this episode, which I was telling you guys about, we have David Lowery, who directed The Green Knight, is going to be part of the main show this week, and then Amber Seeley, who has a film with Elijah Wood called No Man of God, is going to be dropping on Friday. So a ton of ReelBlend content coming your way. But it starts right now with David Bruckner, the director of The Night House, here on ReelBlend. But I have to start here just with this sort of two-part question, because as I was watching Night House, with a character like Beth, who is such a skeptic, I was curious if you believe in ghosts, and if you have to believe in ghosts to tell an effective ghost story.
I do not know what I believe. I do not know if consciousness is a passive phenomenon that sits on top of a deterministic universe and we're all just particles swirling around, or if there is some kind of greater meaning that can be pulled from all of our experiences. I think what made Night House kind of frightening to me, was that it interrogated the idea that there may not be ghosts, that there may not be an afterlife at all. I think that's what really kind of chilled me.
Yeah, that letter that she gets sent is it's unnerving.
The letter's pretty great. It sticks with you, yeah.
Yes, it does.
David, the horror genre is so interesting because I feel like it kind of comes at us in waves. There were sort of the monster slasher movies of the 80s, and then kind of like the whodunits of the 90s, like the Screams, and I know what you did last summer. And then like the early 2000s, we started getting kind of the torture porn. But I'm curious, like right now, as a fan of this genre, I can't quite get my finger on where horror is, or what sort of wave we're in right now. I'm sort of curious, what kind of place do you think the genre is in right now?
I mean, I think it's always really hard to see the current moment, in general. I mean, after the fact, who knows what will kind of materialize in the trends. But I think we're coming off of 10 amazing years in horror, where I feel like, to put it simply, a bit more of an art house approach was embraced by more mainstream audiences. It's not that horror films weren't always metaphorical, that they didn't always have deeper meanings or, symbolic interpretations. It's just that I think were a handful of marquee films that emerged that added a willingness for the audience to see prestige in the genre, and drama in the genre in some ways. And so I think that's allowed for a lot more experimentation, and, who knows where we're at right now.
When you refer to those films, are you talking about like the Ari Asters of the the Hereditaries and the Midsommars, like that kind of like more art house that got start more popularity than they would have gotten, I think, 10, 15, 20 years ago?
Absolutely. I mean, I think Hereditary's masterclass. I think movies like It Follows, The Babadook, Get Out. I think The Witch. There are so many more in the last 10 years that really had an impact and just invited audiences to see stuff a little different. There's also a lot of conversation about post-horror, which were horror films that took on the tone, the feel, the vibes of horror, but were a bit more meta, or didn't kind of clarify the genre elements in a really overt way. I have an appreciation for that stuff. I also like to play the tropes and really enjoy reveling in them at the same time. But yeah, I think people are seeing the genre in a different way now, and it's really exciting in this moment.
Oh, I want you to elaborate on playing the tropes, because one of the fun things I think that you get to do is rely on technology. I think it plays an important role in how you unnerve the audience at different times during Night House with very modern things like text messages. And stereos coming on, or even cell phone photos. There are things that as I was watching them play out, I was like, oh, this is really cool, because it's bringing the horror up to the sort of contemporary time period. Did you have a lot of fun sort of figuring out ways to make modern tools scary and use the tropes that way?
Well, one of the things that I think you're always looking for in horror is some element of the familiar. Like, I even find the word familiar kind of frightening. It's the idea of a recurrent set of events, images, or ideas that you that in one way or another make up the world that is expected around you. And if you can paint a picture made of those elements in some way or another, then when things change or are altered, or when something sinister intrudes upon them, then it almost corrupts, areas of safety around us in some sense. So, a lot of Night House was just trying to put the characters in, the experience of being in your house at night, getting a text message in the dark. How does the glow of the phone feel? How does the text ring? The chimes stand out in the silence of the house, but it's just that wood creaks and crickets outside necessarily. And it's like, we've all been in that moment before. We've all had that weird sleepy state. Maybe our stereos don't turn on their own, but we can get pretty close to what that might feel like if it were to actually happen.
Nothing more terrifying when something like that happens when you're in the shower too. This has happened to me once or twice, but like, I'll get into the shower and then my dog will just start barking his head off. And when I'm home alone, and it's like, all right, great. What are we gonna do now in this situation?
We have pretty scary shower beat in the movie. It's always the sound that's left over when the water goes away. Something is sort of living there underneath that you didn't notice before.
Exactly.
Whenever my Alexa goes off because it hears something, I always think, well, this is how it ends. It ends with the sound of Alexa.
That's a whole other.
It's going off right now. It's literally going off right now because I said her name. Keeping that idea going of the familiar and the tropes. A lot of times we talk with filmmakers sort of about different tropes that are familiar that they want to avoid. But in horror in particular, there are some things that as fans we really love and we want to sort of see in certain movies. I'm curious, are there familiar beats that you really want to put in a movie like this just because you love them so much, no matter, you don't want to avoid them. You want to embrace them even if you have seen them before?
Yeah, I think we try to put a little bit of a different spin on them somewhat, but yeah, when you get into like haunt tropes, this is it's a haunted house film in the simplest way you might describe it in that way, but it's also a bit of a gothic romance. It's also a psychological thriller. It's a little unclear what's in the mind of the protagonist and what's actually overtly happening in some kind of external way. All that stuff's pretty tried and true, and the space that you get in, things that go bump in the night has been so well explored in literature and film over the years that if you tried to completely innovate and do something totally brand new, you'd probably bump into something that had been done before. Mm-hmm. And not just that, but also the audience has an expectation that these things are going to happen. We actively want you to think of this as a haunted house. We have a shot that was rather hard to get in the film where we had to get a boat out in the middle of this lake in our very busy schedule to, get a frame of the house right at sunset, right as twilight set in, that I knew was going to be on the poster. I knew was going to be an image that was played in the trailers. It was going to be the iconic image of the Night House. That sets an expectation of isolation and haunted ideas and fills the audience with potential energy where all that's concerned. So in a weird way, you're in a game where, the audience knows you're going to do things. And then the question becomes, how are you going to play your hand? In what ways are you going to kind of dish this stuff out in a way that might break their expectations, but you're kind of relying on the expectation that something will happen. So in that sense, the familiarity of the tropes is fun. It's good. Like, there's a sense of what's it going to be, and you can hopefully to some degree or another kind of measure that expectation and alter it or change it. Go left when expected to go right.
For sure.
David, it's no surprise that Rebecca is an extremely gifted actress. But one of the things I want to touch on in terms of the way that you work with her is that there are a lot of times where she has to hold down a scene completely by herself. And I find that I would think that would be incredibly challenging. I was just hoping you can walk me through your process of you two collaborating on the days of those scenes in particular to get out of her what you needed, essentially.
Yeah, well, we didn't totally know a high wire act for all of us, and especially for Rebecca. And she's completely fearless. She early on I thought, don't worry, I tried to reassure her, like, it doesn't look right. I'll make sure and get a different angle or something like that. And she said, no, I make a fool out of myself for a living. It's no worry. I'll just go for it. And we didn't really know how to have her react to nothing. in a way that was reliable? Would she just pantomime the whole thing, or would we bring another actor in and have her sort of work with somebody and then take that person away and then see what would happen necessarily? I even brought a mannequin into the room at one point, and she laughed a lot of that off. And we just hit a place where we did a very, very loose blocking kind of run through on what it might be. And then we didn't have a lot of time either. And we just had to kind of go for it. And so a lot of that is, Rebecca really, really just dropping in and pretending. It's make-believe in the simplest sense. That and a handful of gags, different compression gags and air gun gags and things like that to kind of accentuate specific moments.
But you two have been working on this project for a while. You're both producers of it. Was it a story that you were sort of workshopping together?
It was a movie that it was a script written by Ben Collins and Luke Petrowski that who are good friends of mine, that I got to producers at Phantom 4, Keith Levine and David Goyer. And then we sought out Rebecca, and Rebecca came on. So,
gotcha.
So there was development period on the script before she came on, and then when she came on, we took it one step further. And I think a few months after that, we were leaping into production.
Gotcha.
Speaking about Rebecca, I really think that a great performance in a horror movie it's really such a beautiful thing, and obviously she's just does an incredible job. And I'm sort of curious, does an actor need to bring maybe something to this genre, to a film like this, that maybe would never be required in any other genre? When you think of like the great horror performances, whether it's Linda Blair and Ellen Burstyn or Jamie Lee Curtis or whatever the case may be, is there an X factor in a performance for this genre that it would never be required in any other type of film?
I think you have to, there's a certain, you just have to go for it. Like there's absolutely a level of understanding of the genre and a letting go of oneself to some degree or another. I think I think a performer has to have faith that the gags are an extension of the themes that they are also exploring. Because the gags are time consuming and they're ridiculous. And they're, once everybody's covered in blood and you have a prosthetic element in the room and you're doing weird lighting effects and you're in a really awkward position to get a particular shot, it kind of feels like a big embarrassing thing for a whole bunch of adults to be doing together, especially for a living. So if you don't have some like faith that is leading to some productive end, if you don't understand what it's for, I think something can get lost, and you certainly can't find a performance in the midst of things that are, pretty technical. Horror is especially technical. And, I think a lot of people at face value think of it as a lower brow genre or something. You can spend less money on it. You don't have to pay the same attention to detail. And then I've seen people get thrown into horror shoots and just get blown away that it's a lot harder than a drama in certain senses, because you have gags, you have atmosphere, you're shooting all night most of the time. And the level of intensity of experience and emotion is so high, you've got to get there all the time. So I think a general understanding for an actor where those things are concerned is very, very special. Whether exploring trauma, grief, depression, anxiety, the myriad of topics that we kind of tackle in the genre, whether that pulls from an actor's personal experience in some way or provides some supply for them, ultimately that's kind of their business. I don't really tap into that too much. We kind of talk about human experience in a general sense. And, if somebody wants to share or tell me what reserve, they're pulling from, they can. But I find, most people that are really wielding it retain a kind of privacy when they do the work, which is pretty fascinating.
When you mention so many scenes while you're filming kind of seeming ridiculous, which obviously they never end up coming across that way in the film, but you can look at a film and sort of see that because you have the knowledge of what goes on behind the scenes. When you watch like the great horror movies of our time, do you ever see moments where you're like, oh, I bet that was ridiculous on set? Like, it's great in the film, but you look at it and go, that had to be just really stupid when they were shooting.
Oh, yeah. And in fact, you might look at it and off given what you're looking at, because how these things come together. Also, sometimes the style of how something is depicted is born from utility. That was always the case. It's like in French New Wave, when they stopped shooting reverse shots, the jump cut was born because they were running out of film and they just decided continuity wasn't an issue. I mean, you see this all the time in horror where the way a prosthetic is filmed, or a particular haunted element is depicted is completely rooted in what you can do to pull off the gag necessarily. And then that just becomes the flavor of it. And so, yeah, you identify those things a little bit more, which is why I think if you make these movies and a filmmaker comes along and like fools you, it's really delectable to see when somebody can do that. Yeah.
Yeah, the one thing that ruins it is a lot of times we'll read these behind the scenes, you know, growing up reading Fangoria or something like that, and you'd see a deep dive into a movie that really got underneath your skin, and then you see a photograph from behind the scenes, and you see where the camera was or where the crew was, and I'm just like, damn it just deflated the whole thing for me.
I remember like the shots of like when like, you know, even recently like Pennywise hanging out and like, you know, the shots of him laughing with Bill Hader on set. And you're like, oh, I wish I hadn't seen that.
Yeah, that's not fun.
Yeah, you always look at the classic image of the monster with the head off, like smoking a cigarette off to the side. Like, that always breaks the illusion. Yeah.
Speaking of illusions, and I don't want to give away the specifics as to why this is, but there's a reason in Night House why you have to cast Rebecca lookalikes. What is that process like? Do you put out a call for people who look like Rebecca Hall?
Honestly, it was just when we were in development, back before Rebecca had even signed on, when I was just thinking about it. And she was reading the script. I just started looking around and finding people that could be uncannily in the same category. You know, we didn't want to like find an exact double necessarily. And I had actually just come across Stacey Martin's work, who I'd seen in a few movies, and was really just blown away by what she could do. She also felt like a younger Rebecca in some ways, you know, maybe by 10 years. And there was an interesting undercurrent there that given the stakes and context of their particular scenes, I thought could be pretty interesting. And, but yeah, we looked at a few different people that we thought could double for her.
David, I wanted to switch over for a second to The Ritual, because it honestly truly is one of my favorite horror movies of the last 20 years. And it's a movie that I actually find people are still discovering and coming up to me and saying, oh my God, I watched this movie last night. I'd never seen it before. Have you seen it? Because with Netflix, a lot of times you never really know when it comes out. So people think maybe it's a movie that they just discovered within the last week. I'm sort of curious, because it's on Netflix, are you still finding people are still discovering that? Because it's truly remarkable. And I love whenever people come up to me and go, have you seen this movie called The Ritual?
I appreciate that. Yeah, no, it's the platform's bizarre in that way, because yes, it still feels like it's just happening and it's been a few years. So people, I don't have a very active social media presence in any way, but anytime I kind of tap in, I'm like, it really does. It fuels me to keep going, to find that there are people that really connect to it, you know? And I don't think there's a lot of horror films out there about guys in their mid-30s approaching middle age and, you know, dealing with like masculinity in crisis necessarily. And so something that I relate to quite a bit. And so, yeah, it seems to find new audience and a lot of people coming back to it, even in the last few years. So a lot of rewatches and conversations around it in that regard.
Can I just follow up and ask where I'm sorry, Sean. I was just going to ask where the design for that monster came from, because I'm always curious about different monster designs, and that one in particular is one of my more favorite over the last period of monster films we've gotten.
Keith Thompson is a genius. You know, I mean, this guy's up there. He'll be one of the great creature designers. I mean, he in some ways, I think. I mean, he's done a lot of work across different mediums. So, I mean, he's got a huge fan base, but he was somebody whose work I was familiar with. And when I got the job, I just kind of hunted him down and said, hey, I'm doing a movie and I've got Andy Serkis is producing, and it's based on this really awesome British horror novel. What do you think? And he said, sure. And we tossed back and forth on the, ideas of what it could be for a while. And he probably did 10 kind of core explorations, and that was one of them. And it was up on the wall, and we just kept coming back to it, and it was crazy, and I'd never seen anything like it. It was completely insane. And one of the things that Keith taught me about design was that fascinating design has complexities that are than a first glance. Because there's almost nothing new under the sun. So it's sometimes you look at something and you think you understand it. And then if it draws you deeper, you understand it in a different way moments later. And if you're playing with the human form in some way, you can get a really uncanny balance in that sense. And that's especially useful if you're doing a movie that has a big monster reveal, because monster reveals are classically, it's just a letdown.
Yeah.
You know, if you put a bunch of people in a room and there's something mysterious beating on the door on the outside, when you finally in the third act open the door, on some level or another, it's like you can't show them anything that they're not going to kind of go, oh, really? It's just a spider. It's just a, it's just a giant moose. Like, why have I been watching this? And
it's so true. It's so true.
It can bum you out immensely. I mean, every animal, every phylum or species has been explored in monster form in some way or another. Every kind of different facet of alien design has been explored. So it's like everything gets categorized really quickly. But if you can see something sort of suffer that beat, and then find yourself questioning, like, wait a minute, I don't know what I'm seeing, and I'm drawn deeper into it, then maybe you can offer a bit more to the experience. So that was a little bit, our approach to
that's awesome. Well, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
I want to find the audience member who was watching Jaws for the first time, and when they saw Bruce, and they were like, "That's it?
That's it? It's a shark?
It's just that shark? It's not such a big deal."
It's right there in the title. Yep.
We have spent a lot of time on the show, obviously, over the past 18 months discussing films getting delayed, and you had a unique experience in the fact that this movie played at Sundance all the way back in 2020, and then you had to sit on it. And I'm curious just if that made it that much harder that some people saw it and you kind of knew how it was going to play and then had to wait.
I mean, I think the pandemic was so surreal for all of us that it just overshadowed any of that. I mean, it was for me, and I think I speak for a lot of the crew, a lot of my collaborators, kind of a big step up for us. Been to Sundance a few times, never premiered a movie, first Friday night there, and then made a big sale. And then somebody like Searchlight comes to pick it up and gets behind it. And you go, wow, we're going to get a theatrical, like 2,000 screen release here in a few days. And so that was a bit of a game changer for us in terms of what's possible, how many people are going to see the work, maybe what we get to do next. And then the whole world shut down. So I think at that point it was almost like movies didn't matter for a while. And then slowly we all started coming back to life. And I don't know, it's surreal now to have it come out. It's been a while for us. But it would have been surreal for me anyway to have, this many people seeing it. And I'm just excited to see what they will think. Yeah.
David, you've worked both in long form and short form storytelling. You look at your feature films with this and The Ritual, and then obviously you did work on Creepshow and V.H.S. and Southbound. I'm sort of curious, do you have a preference one way or the other? Do you like to have more time to flesh out a story, or do you kind of like the challenge of what can I do in 10 minutes kind of thing?
I mean, bite-sized horror is so fun because you can get in late, you can get out early. You're not burdened with third act explanations and sort of wrapping it all up in a bow for a very broad and complicated and varied audience. You can also be kind of meaner, more abstract. You can go a little bit more nuts in short form. So I adore short form, and anthologies kept me alive when I couldn't get features made for years and years and years. And I had a blast with them, but they're hard to support, professionally. It's hard to stay alive on anthologies and on shorts necessarily. And I'd say features, you get the opportunity to follow a character in greater detail and arc with the character and feel them change over the course of the movie. And that's kind of a deeper, richer experience for a filmmaker in many ways. Sure. And then exploration, you never know where it's going to land necessarily. So it kind of comes to life in front of you in collaboration with writers and the actor.
The concept of the VHS really felt like something that they could have kept doing every single year. It felt like a really great way to introduce new voices, to get fresh directors in front of people in the genre. Were there conversations? Are you surprised that sort of stopped becoming a thing in the anthology, or do you have any insights into why it stopped becoming a thing?
I think it took a slight pause, but we're doing another one.
Oh, get out of here! I didn't even know that.
Very soon.
Really?
I was fortunate to be a producer on it, but and put it together. But it's definitely a showcase of some return filmmakers and some new voices as well. But it's called V.H.S. 94, and I think actually I probably shouldn't say it, but it's it'll be out and about this fall. sometime.
Oh,
yeah, I'm
nice.
really excited. Yeah, no, we should be making VHS movies every year. I don't think it'll ever run out of steam. Yeah, I mean, found footage, bite-sized is just too much fun, you know. Yeah. And there's an attitude about VHS that I think is always kind of welcome. I mean, they're fuck you movies, we used to say in some way. You know, I mean, they obeyed no one and could just do whatever they wanted. There's just a kind of place for that on a Friday or Saturday night that you want to see. And I think the idea behind VHS 94 is like, that's the year. You could pick any year and be true to the technology of that year. And we could just, you know, audiences like it. We could just keep making them.
Do you know where it's going to
go? Shutter.
Mm-hmm. Oh, is it really? Nice. Very cool.
Yeah. Nice. Nice.
That's a good fit.
Yeah.
David, so I was a big fan of all the 80s monster movies, the ones that's really what I grew up watching, the Freddys and the Jasons and the Michaels and all that sort of stuff. And last year I put a piece together where I reached out to all these guys, found all these guys and brought them together for like a big interview. And one of my favorite guys that I got to speak with for that piece was Doug Bradley, who just told incredible stories about the set of Hellraiser and that, you know, people coming up and touching the pins and everything. He was just a great guy. It's going to be interesting to think of. I can't imagine a Hellraiser movie without Doug Bradley around in some form or fashion. Can you tell me whether or not he's involved with your new one at all?
I mean, I will say almost nothing about Hellraiser at this point, only because it's still very, very early. You know, I can gush on the franchise, but it's at this point, I think it would spoil audiences to get into anything too particular, you know, but yeah, obviously like it's a dream come true to explore that world. And we are definitely doing everything we can to be true to the themes of the original, but we are definitely not remaking the original movie, which I think has been misreported a little bit. You know, I don't think there's any remaking the 87 film. But yeah, Pinhead is sacred cultural legacy, and what Doug did with it is, you know, unparalleled. I think, you know, for us to remount this film or reboot this franchise in like, you know, in 2022 or something, is to do something that harkens back to the original, but also and is true to the themes, but also we have to kind of open ourselves up to reimagining it to some degree and taking it in a direction that inspires us. We have to kind of make it our own.
Is it exciting to see classic properties like that in addition to the work that you're doing, like Candyman's coming back? You know, you're seeing a lot of these horror franchises get rejuvenated. Is that something you want to see keep happening? Because it is a good way for filmmakers to put a fresh stamp on something that we're all relatively familiar with.
I think it really depends on the franchise. You know, I mean, a lot of the stuff from the 80s in particular had such a strong conceit that you just feel like we've got to give this a go again. Like there's more to be explored here. I think anything Barker would fall under that. I think there's such a unique universe that he creates, particularly with Hellraiser. I mean, myself as a fan, I just would be down to see anybody open the box again and give it a go. So in that sense, yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff that I'm dying to see what people will do with it. But there's other things that, I mean, I won't mention anything in particular, but like there's other stuff that's probably played out a little bit. You know, reboots, remakes that we've seen 1,000 times before. But no, horror always follows trends. It always echoes itself from an earlier time, you know. And for me in the 80s, you know, some of my favorite horror films, you know, or sci-fi horror films were remakes. You know, The Thing and Cronenberg's Fly, Carpenter's Thing and Fly. I mean, these were movies that I discovered, completely fell in love with, only years later found out that they were, you know, an attempt at something that had already been attempted. You know, so I think the spirit of reinvention, the spirit of remix will always be welcome.
You know, I do love that we're sort of in this era of, like you said, not remakes, but continuing stories. I love this idea that Hellraiser is going to be continued. I love that Candyman is a continued story and Halloween the continuing. But then, like you said, there are some franchises where I'm not sure it would work. Like I think about Nightmare. And I don't know, because if Robert Englund's not available to come back, like, can you know, as much as I love Jackie Earle Haley, like he wasn't Freddy Krueger. So in that sort of situation, do you sort of feel like that might be done then? Because if you can't get Robert back, then you can't really continue that story.
I don't know, because I feel like Nightmare on Elm Street is one of the greatest horror, you know, ever conceptualized. You know, the idea that, you know, Freddy can get you when you fall asleep, and that you have the added dilemma of knowing that if you fall into a dream state, this guy's going to show up and horrible things are going to happen, hopefully with a comic undertone, and that you don't necessarily know the moment that the dream begins. I mean, it's just so much fun to play with. There's a million different things you can do with it. Also, anytime you can get surrealism into the genre in some way or another, you're getting into a terrain where like anything can happen. Like a new filmmaker could come along and conceptualize a way to do Nightmare on Elm Street that would completely reinvigorate our idea of, how that's done or what that could be. Whether or not you can recreate the direct iconography of Freddy Krueger, that's pretty challenging. You know, you might have to ask the audience to look at Freddy Krueger in a slightly different way.
That's true. That's interesting.
And you hear, I don't imagine that Night House is lending itself to a franchise. I think it's kind of encouraging without giving anything away necessarily. You didn't design it, even though it's a ghost story to be a type of sequelized thing. But I guess, nowadays people can reinvent themselves and take the concept and drop it someplace else. There's plenty of ways, I guess, that this story could go forward if they came back around to you.
To be honest, we have never discussed it or thought about it. You're right. It's not exactly, I don't want to give anything away about the movie, but I don't know where one goes. But yeah, I mean, hopefully the film on its own will just stick with people. We'll see. Anything could happen.
It certainly will. David, we can't thank you enough for taking the time to sit down and speak with us.
My pleasure.
I'm really excited for people to see this, man. It's really effective.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Great conversation. Yeah,
appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks very much.
Care. We want to thank David Bruckner for being a guest on the show. You guys absolutely have to check out The Night House. It's just a really great ghost story, and Rebecca Hall gives one of her best performances in this film. If you want to hear my longer, a little bit spoilery review of the film, make sure you check out episode number 178 of the ReelBlend podcast, and in addition to all the great stuff that we bring on that episode. So as I mentioned, keep it right here on your normal ReelBlend feeds for plenty more interviews that are coming this week, including David Lowery, the director of The Green Knight, and Amber Seeley, who has a film coming out called No Man of God, and plenty of other things that we have on the agenda coming up soon for all of you ReelBlend fanatics. So we'll talk to you later.